Okay, hang on, gotta fix something right away. There we go. We're going to have a chat tonight, Andrew Brownell and I, and we're going to speak about Andrew's 2023 release. It's the Divine on the Divine Art label that I think is fairly recent, isn't it? I've dealt with a couple of other artists on making CDs with Divine Art. I'm not sure how long the company's been in existence. Any idea?
Uh, I, I'm sad to say I don't know either, but I do know they've been around long enough to have a bit of a following, and that
Yeah,
there are some, recording aficionados who,
that's
when I
right.
told them it was coming out on Divine Art, they said, "Oh, that's great."
Yeah.
So
Not only that, but artists are
yeah,
going to that. So we're talking about a very simpatico group of people. So again, the album is called Shades of Night. Andrew Brownell is our pianist. Uh, and again, Divine Art. It's a 2023 release, and this is a compilation. Basically, it's a great um, album to reveal your various capabilities, which are astonishing in all kinds of styles and so on. We'll talk about it because we're looking at music by again the imagery, the idea, the concept is about the night. And I loved your introduction, Andrew, that we'll get to in a bit, where you described that thing about remember when there was a, or can we even imagine a time when there was no electricity, when the night was in fact dark, even with gas lamps in the 19th century and so on. So I've often thought about it and tried to imagine what would it be like to spend 3 hours getting dressed, let alone having the servants hitch up the horse and the carriage, and then the hour drive to the opera house in the same city. I mean, that kind of, it's just a whole other world. So I love the idea that you are trying to capture that idea of night. And we're looking at a plethora, I think is the word, of composers. And when I say excerpts, I'm speaking about lots of nocturnes, but also, as we'll talk about, from the Brahms number 3 sonata, the Andante movement, just that movement alone, of course, because that's the subject matter. Clair de Lune from the Suite Bergamasque, and so on. Two pieces of Couperin. We have Liebermann, a nocturne. I've never heard that. Nocturne number 5. I had no idea. Now I want to hear all of his
they're
nocturnes for piano.
fantastic.
Bartok, Chopin I've mentioned, Robert Schumann, and that one, that we're talking In der Nacht from the Fantasiestück Opus 12, is, as we all know, with Robert Schumann, there is a darkness, and so I hope everybody's kind of getting that idea. It's a wonderful potpourri of music dealing with the subject of nocturnal, if you will, nocturnes, but in a very clever and interesting way. And you have also made a couple of very deliberate decisions that I find quite fascinating, and we'll talk about them. Now, I guess we'd better make sure everybody knows who you are. And then maybe I'll ask you a question or two. Uh, Andrew Brownell, native of Portland, Oregon. Yes, I'm a Spokane kid, but Pacific Northwest. Yes, native of Portland. You began studying piano at the age of 4. We're going to go there. Your teachers have included Nancy Weems, Horacio Gutierrez at the University of Houston, John Perry at the University of Southern California in Los Angeles, uh, Joan Havel at the Guildhall School of Music in London, where you earned your doctorate.
Yes.
And you came away from all of that with no accent. It's terribly depressing, but still, you lived in Britain for 11 years, surely. Anyway,
I think
it,
I have some slightly tall vowels every now and then. I
oh,
don't
okay, there you go. There you go. I'm happy. Sort of colonial Americanness. You know what I
Yeah,
mean? That funny
s-
mix.
perhaps I think maybe at one point a few years ago it was a little bit more mid-Atlantic than it
Oh,
is.
okay. Well, I understand this. As you know, I studied in London for 3 years, and I ate it up and came home and was just a complete brat for at least a couple months with my English accent until I finally said to myself, you know what, you're an American, get over it. Okay,
Ah,
anyway, Guildhall School of Music we mentioned in London. I was at Trinity College of Music when I was younger, and
the building. Yeah.
prize-winning. You were a member of a prize-winning trio for the Fischoff Chamber Music Competition in the United States. You've played with orchestras, like the Philharmonia, the Amsterdam Concertgebouw, Vienna Philharmonic, and so on. 2017, you got a job on the faculty at Butler School of Music, University of Texas at Austin, and you've been there ever since. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Here we're going to throw a quote. We might as well throw the whole kitchen sink at you. Described by Musical Opinion as potentially one of the most significant pianists of his generation. And this is not an exaggeration. I'm going to tell you later. Let me play with the lights a little bit. That didn't help. Let me turn this one on so I don't fade into the night as the Southern California sun sets. That didn't help either. Anyway, it's good enough. Good enough. But anyway, I've completely lost my train of thought. First prize, 2005 Jan Hummel competition, Bach competition in Leipzig. All this, I know what I was going to say. It's the quality of your playing that Austin should be thrilled to have. And I've talked to you before we taped. The pieces themselves on this CD are not what I'm interested in because they are played virtually flawlessly, and we will touch on them.
Thank you.
Which means, and I'm again not just throwing compliments out. It's like it's when especially a pianist has such a calm mastery of so many styles and can play these styles so elegantly. And we're talking, impressionistic music. We're talking Baroque to the max repertoire, just a whole Debussy and so on. So it's brilliant level of musicianship. So you did your teachers proud.
Hope so. Thank you.
Now it's time to let me be quiet for a minute. Hard to believe. And again, it sounds a little bit corny, but as your bio mentions, somehow something triggered at a young age, at age 4, this journey that you went on. I've been on this a journey. You have to be willing to do a journey to have a career in the arts. Because it's up and down and then maybe even downer and then up and so on.
Yeah.
Tell me about this. Where were you? You said Portland. Was it Portland as a little kid? How did this all come together in terms of your decision? When does that decision come?
I do get asked that with some regularity. It's not the most, it's not a rare question. But there is, I can't say that there's a decisive moment where that occurred, and I'll explain why that is. But if we were to just go back to how the heck I started playing music, I don't come from a musical family. Neither of my parents ever studied it or sang or played an instrument. And I'm told, now this all could be a terrible lie that my parents sure, but somehow I think not. I'm told that at the age of 3 or 4, I asked for piano lessons. Well, we didn't have a piano in the house. And so I think back on that, and if it's true, I must have been exposed to one at some point. And I think the most likely place for that to have happened was probably PBS, honestly. Because I do know I watched a fair amount of PBS when I was very young.
Oh, I see.
And I think I must have seen one there and developed an interest in it. And I think it took a little bit of convincing and persistence on my part, but my mother was always very supportive of this. She saw music as part of a well-rounded education and so on, and so arranged for me to have lessons. We rented my first piano, eventually bought, but that was that. I don't recall having been nagged by either of my parents to practice as a child, which is very unusual now that I teach kids sometimes, at least.
In fact, I wish my parents had nagged me more.
Okay.
because what you have just described is exactly my story. No musician anywhere to be found in the family. I'm so envious of musicians who grow up in musical families. But at some point, a piano was there, and I hated piano lessons. I've regretted that all my life, and I wish, because I'm a conductor type guy. I'm supposed to sit down and open up a score and play the whole thing through, read all 24 lines all at once with my 10 fingers. But yeah, so I mean, from my point of view, I wish they had pushed me harder.
Yeah,
But
interesting. Yeah.
anyway,
No one ever says, "Oh, I really regret taking piano lessons when I was a kid." It's always the regret that they didn't do more with it. But
uh,
but I think I did as much as I could.
mm,
Um, and but as to how I ended up in this as a career, I think um, when I was in high school, and when young people begin to think about what am I going to study, what am I doing with this life. Um, I don't think there was ever really a moment where there was a conscious decision. It was just sort of an inevitability. I don't mean it's something I drifted into without much thought or planning, but it was, what the hell else was I going to do? I look back on it now and I think, what else could I do? And I think, well, I like cooking. I could have a chef and I think seriously, if I were to really think of other careers, the only other thing I think I'm sufficiently interested in to have potentially made a career of it is languages. I might have become a linguist, but
I hate you for that.
really?
Oh, I had an eighth grade grammar teacher who,
Okay.
of course, was old and near retirement, and we destroyed her. I learned nothing about English grammar. So, of course, it's a big crippling problem when you're dealing with languages and conjugations and
Sure.
understanding what a predicate is. I still have no idea, and so forth. Anyway,
A
see, am I making you feel better?
little bit, but
Go ahead.
maybe. Um, but yeah, it was just an inevitability, really. It was what I spent my time doing if I wasn't at school or doing homework for the next day. I was,
Hmm.
listening rapaciously to recordings and to
Sure.
the radio and reading about piano music and pianists and pianos and
Oh, so it really got in there. The bug really got at you. Sorry, I think we got a racer going by. I
uh,
live downtown. It gets problematic sometimes. Interesting. I was going to ask whether if you were gifted. Usually, some teacher at high school said, "Hey, kid, come and play with the for the chorus or something." Nothing like that happened, right? You were just nobody knew, maybe even if you get my
well, I
drift.
had piano lessons and I was doing, local competitions and that
Stuff
sort of.
like that. And that was
Uh,
yeah,
so I think a few people knew, but
yeah.
uh, yeah, that's how I ended up in it, and
And then
you know,
from there on out, the collegiate thing, it was like, okay, it's time for college, music major,
yeah,
piano.
it was a very clear choice for me. I'm
Uh-huh.
not sure it's one that either of my parents particularly wanted to see, and which I totally understand,
We all do.
yeah, yeah.
My
Uh,
dad wanted me to be a dentist desperately,
okay.
and I disappointed him. But because he knew well, everybody knows it's hard
Of
in the arts
course,
to make a living. It's hard. It's
one
just
thing
plain
to
hard.
say it's hard to a teenager, but then to have, I wish someone had sat me down and told me exactly what was involved, because if someone says it's hard, well, you think, oh yeah, well, I'll be poor a little bit, but
Uh-huh.
they don't, you
But I'm
don't.
brilliant, and so no problem.
Yes. um,
That's what I thought. Hmm.
yeah, I'm not sure that knowing everything would necessarily have changed anything. I
Yeah,
suspect I
yeah,
might
yeah.
still have ended up where I am now,
Yes.
and I'm very glad for that.
Yeah.
But
And by the way, you have not mentioned, but you've touched upon it psychologically, which is that when we are, those of us who follow any kind of artistic life, it's forever. Once we're smitten, that's it. I mean, that's it. And I could not be happier.
yeah,
I mean, everything else is mundane and boring outside of a life in the arts, as far as I'm concerned. So
yeah,
I
yeah.
understand. That once it's in your head, that's it. It's so. Anyway, congratulations, I think, to both of us. Of course, you have a nice teaching job.
Okay.
So you have managed to get through the gauntlet of finding a way to say, "Hey, mom and dad, I'm a professor now,"
Well,
and the check's coming in, and not to worry anymore.
I'm very fortunate in that regard.
And also, it's not a mystery, really, when you think about it. But in my old age, um, it takes that long to begin to understand what our parents did.
Hmm.
And you mentioned your mom. I had no idea as a kid that my mom was saw it, and that's what mothers are for. They see it and they direct it. They direct you. My mom directed me in certain areas, and it never occurred to me until years and years later. So
Isn't that interesting? Okay. Yeah.
let's so we've dealt with the origin story, uh, and we know that you then got your various degrees, and of course the doctorate from was that Guildhall?
Yes, that's
Yeah,
right.
Guildhall. Was that in the new building or the old building? Were you in the new Guildhall in London? Which is a glorious, huge structure and has a gorgeous auditorium and all the rest of it.
That okay. Sorry. They still inhabit the old building. They're kind of straddled
Oh,
over.
oh, I didn't realize that. I didn't
Yeah,
realize that. I
but
thought they had moved altogether out of the old building.
no, sadly. Well, I think drama and dance have. The musicians of course are always left with the
Of
short end of the
course.
stick, isn't that?
And now you have me just a tiny bit depressed because I remember the old building.
Ah,
Because as I mentioned, I was at Trinity College of Music, and I went over to Heiichiro Oyama, the conductor violist, was at Guildhall. I was at Trinity College of Music, and of course, we see each other and chat. But I remember it as just being a dingy dungeon to go in. I mean, it made Trinity College of Music's facility look like the Grand Palais
yeah.
compared to Guildhall. Anyway,
Trinity in Greenwich at the time that
no, no.
no. Oh, it was before they made the move to the Royal
Yeah,
Mint.
exactly. They were in
Okay.
Great Marylebone Street or something like that. I can't remember. Right off of
Ooh.
Oxford
Oh,
Street,
okay.
somewhere. So again, it was like a five-story, busy, overgrown. There were way too many students, and so on. The orchestra rehearsals were down in a basement across the street, that kind of thing. So anyway. Oh, enough of this reminiscence. Um,
Look, I will say yes. I was in the old building, which the Guildhall moved into in the 70s, I think, when the Barbican was completed. And as so often happens, um, it was only after I had finished my work there that they began breaking ground on the new
yeah,
facilities. So
never fails. Yep.
shucks.
Yeah, never fails. Let's look at I think I've touched on the programming, but let me review it again a little bit because there's a reason. Just not in detail, but Beethoven, the Adagio from Moonlight. Chopin, one of the nocturnes, the number 27, the Opus 27, number 2. Hindemith, Nachstoch from Suite 1922. That was news to me.
I hope it was
That
good.
was news to me. Well, I want to know what 1922 was. In other words, I don't have dates, and I love dates because they help us put things in history. But what was 1922? I mean, I'm curious. Debussy, as we've mentioned, Couperin, two pieces from the Help I'm Having Trouble Seeing from the
One of the ordre.
thank you. Yeah, the
Yeah,
Nightingale song from the
yeah,
one
yeah.
of the
Well,
Rosignon on Amour. This Liebermann Nocturne for piano. Very, very, very interested and excited to hear that piece. And now I want to hear all of these nocturnes of Liebermann. Cooper, I've mentioned. Bartok, Chopin, Schumann, Robert Schumann, the In der Nacht, I've mentioned. The Barber Nocturne. Very, very, very interesting. I love Samuel Barber's music. And the Brahms, the Andante movement from the Sonata Number 3, and Debussy, of course, Clair de Lune. And as you say in your really wonderful program notes, you made this complete circle of this night circle, and therefore, finally, I remember my question, which is, what kind of a nightmare was it to sort out what you would put on the CD? See what I mean? Because there are so many.
yeah, yeah.
I ask the question a lot when there are these kind of CDs. I mean, what did you have? A huge table? You know what I mean? And those 17 went on the floor. And how'd you organize this program? Because it's very, very clever.
Thank you. With so much music being released on streaming platforms these days, where you have the option to shuffle tracks and all that, I'm really pleased to be talking about the order, you
I
know,
see. Yeah, interesting.
start
Interesting.
with what it finishes with, because in fact a great deal of thought did go.
Absolutely.
Uh,
Always. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Well, hopefully always. I think in an ideal world, yes. um, to choose the theme of the night, uh, that in and of itself wasn't that difficult. There's actually quite a bit of music there, uh, certainly in the piano repertoire, and of course we can always move beyond that and find all kinds of uh, things for other forces and instruments. But two of the most famous works in the piano repertoire are what I close and open the album with, respectively Clair de Lune from Debussy, and the first movement, even if I have a little bit of guilt about not including the whole thing, of the Moonlight Sonata. Um, and then from there on, it was just a question of finding enough contrast, because there's a
Mm.
danger of it getting too slow. There is rather a
I
lot of slow
see. Yeah. Uh-huh.
on this album, and so I wanted to be sure that I was juxtaposing things that were lively, uh, and next to things that were slow or maybe not as lively. I wanted
Boy,
there.
that's tough, isn't it? Really, that by itself is hours and hours.
It is, yeah, yeah. I also wanted, you talked about darkness in the album earlier, and I also wanted there to be a certain amount of light as well. So, uh, just finding the right balance and not having, say, 3 or 4 consecutive tracks where you're dealing with the exact same mood, and then, the
It's
interest.
hard. It's very, very hard. Yeah, that was a dilemma to work through, to
Yeah,
solve. Yeah.
but I think what I'm perhaps proudest of in all that is not only having found, I think, an order of the tracks that works, but if you actually look at the tonalities of the movements,
Keep talking. Keep talking. I love this stuff.
you may have
Go.
noticed it, I don't know. So the album begins in C sharp minor, finishes in D flat major, just an inharmonic spelling of C sharp. But along the way, I think the largest tonal distance you ever go from one track to another is a minor or a major third. There's usually a tonic dominant relationship being played with. And I am one of those weird people who thinks that listeners, subconsciously, whether they know it or not, are impacted by the tonal relationships in a program. I know I'm not the only one. I know, we are rare, we are few in number, but but we're not. It's not quite as it's not that far out there. And when I finally hit on the right order, I remember just getting quite a thrill and thinking, "This is it. This has to be the order of the album."
Wonderful. Of course, I spent an afternoon with you. I'm glad you told me about this cycle, if you will, tonality cycle, if that makes any sense at all. And again, what you're speaking to is just that when things, how complicated it is to get things to work right intellectually. And
Yeah,
again, it's not about the public going, oh, sure enough, those are all minor thirds between all. It's not about that. It's about helping the mind, the subconscious, if you will. I hope I'm not going to get myself too spaced out here, to feel good and to follow a
a
pathway,
narrative.
a narrative pathway. Exactly
And
right.
you said cycle or full circle, and I think that's absolutely right. We return to where we started, and nowhere along the path laid out by the album do we veer terribly far off course, or is there a huge
Hmm.
disruption to it? At least I don't think so.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And also, nobody needs to know any of this. The public.
That's the
No.
beauty of
Well, that's
it.
the beauty of composers. Now, I've always thought they were terribly, terribly sly, because composers hide secrets everywhere in all of their stuff. And I mean, since the beginning of time, the secrets, and they always keep their mouths shut.
Yeah.
Don't have you noticed? They always are very silent, and then they say, "Oh, but that's for you to discover." I
Yeah.
decide. And in a way, that was for me to discover on this CD. Now, I didn't make the connection in the afternoon to that tonal connection. I didn't need to, but the programming all by itself was very interesting. And I just let me jump ahead a little bit, and then we'll kind of look at pieces a little. But I of course I'm busily doing my thing, and people know, I think, who've been interviewed by me. I listen to the pieces, and I just do sort of stream of consciousness notes while I'm listening. And I was doing fine, and I'm fine with your CD so far. Everything's fine. Oh, Hindemith, that's kind of nice, in there after Chopin, Hindemith, and I'm back and Debussy and so on. Then I got to the Couperin, and you know what I'm getting at. The two Couperin pieces with this Lieberman nocturne in there. Tell me about that formula, how you came upon it, and how clever is it?
I'm glad. Well,
Because it stopped me in my tracks. Because I
okay.
thought this guy just has no shame whatsoever. He's just tearing the whole thing up to pieces and throwing I've forgotten his Lowell Lieberman piece in there and so on. So tell me just that little capsule of messaging.
Well, I infer that you like the choice. I hope you do.
Yes, and
And
quite interesting. And there is a connection,
yeah, yeah,
stylistic connection and stuff like that. Yeah.
sure. Yes, I must talk about that. But I have actually been in contact with Mr. Lieberman, and he's he was fine with it as well. He said it
Good.
works. I'll tell you what the reason was. The the two Couperin movements appear consecutively in the suite, and of course the second one is a variation. It's a slightly more ornamented version of the first one, and it seemed to me irresponsible just to play the first one. Uh, Particularly the
Okay.
composer went to the trouble of writing a variation.
Uh-huh.
But then, if you just go back a few minutes to what I was saying about remaining too long in a particular mood on this album, I thought that could potentially be problematic. How can I make this work? Well, that was when the idea of putting something in between them came to me. And, something that one sees a lot in albums of popular music is that you have a track, usually the opening track, but not necessarily, reappear later in the album, slightly remixed, slightly reorchestrated, or the structure of it is changed slightly. And that's not something we do as classical musicians. And I thought, well, why not?
Hmm. Hmm.
Why not borrow that idea? This just appears two tracks later rather than being much further down the list of tracks in the album. But then I thought, well, going back to tonality, what can fit in there that isn't?
That's that's so important. It
Yeah,
really is. And now that I understand, it was in fact a deliberate tracking, if you will. So yeah,
sure.
very
Yeah.
very interesting.
And I don't find the Couperin very dark. To me, that's one. Those two movements are among the lighter tracks.
Hmm. Okay, fair enough.
I
Hmm.
wanted to find something that contrasted. For me, the Lieberman is dark. There's something a little bit disquieting about it. Um, but there's also a lot of that filigree work high up in the keyboard.
Hmm.
He suggested a relationship with birdsong, and so it
Got
seemed the
it.
perfect fit. But the thing that I really want listeners to walk away from this experiencing is the sense of the return of the Couperin as a kind of reprise. How do you hear it differently after having just heard this Lieberman nocturne? I mean, does it change? And certainly it should, and I hope it does. But does it change what you experience out of this piece versus what you heard in the first movement?
Yes, exactly. And I'm trying to remember whether because I was just looking at my notes here about the Lieberman, but I don't specifically, because you mentioned this. There's a hint. We remember that Lieberman is surrounded. Everybody out there is surrounded by two Le Rossignol, two pieces that refer to the what is that? Rossignol, I've forgotten
Uh,
already.
Nightingales.
Thank you, to Nightingale. And of course, there are those, as you mentioned in the program notes, there are those distinct allusions, I think they are, as opposed to illusions, referencing bird
Yes.
chatter, and as you mentioned in the notes, the kind of build up to a kind of ecstatic, amorous kind of thing. I think I did hear. Did I hear something in the Lieberman that might have, because you mentioned it, and I'm trying to remember whether I heard it, and I keep thinking I think I did, because I found it so charming. A little kind of somehow a connection to that, as you said, that nightingale sound, a bird sound, even in the Lieberman, or am I all wet? You straighten me out on this one, please.
No, I think it would have been some of the ornamental material more than any
Probably, yeah,
the sort of main themes,
yeah.
but I think uh, certainly it's playing around in a sound world that's very close to the Couperin, despite the fact that these pieces are separated by
Sure,
250
yeah,
plus
it's
years.
amazing, wonderful. So the well done on the choices, but that's it. And also you mentioned, and I'm trying to go back in my deep thoughts about psychological stuff, because you mentioned water
Hmm.
and watery sounds, and they are this kind of watery idea that. Not to say bubbling brook, but I hope everybody out there gets what I'm trying to explain. This movement that is a kind of watery sound, and its relationship to nighttime or to nature and so. In other words, water and darkness somehow I seem to recall have a connection or other. I'm not quite sure what I'm trying to say, but that also is a consistent appearance. These water
Yes.
imageries throughout the CD, and I thought that was very clever the way I think you discussed this very thing. Oh, it did. Straighten me out on this one too, please.
No, no. Well, I'm glad you found that. It wasn't a major theme tying the whole thing together, but
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it does. Just it if night is the subject matter, yeah, it's naturally going
Something,
to
the
up.
night brooks. I mean, maybe all of us have some kind of memory of nighttime out on the camping trip, and the brook is over there. And I mean, something that
Yeah,
watery
yeah,
night fluid,
yeah.
watery kind of whatever you want to call it, that sensibility, if you will.
The Moonlight Sonata got its nickname because a
That's
contemporary
perfect.
critic was reminded of a lake in Switzerland, I think. Was it Lake Geneva? Uh, Schumann track in der Nacht, he Schumann.
Yeah. And in Schumann's case, night, all right. I can't get away from this man. I've been looking at him for some years now, and it's everywhere. There's a very deep tragedy and tragic
Oh,
about Robert Schumann's music. And very, very moving. So, but I want to now go. Let me just take a second. This is kind of what. Hang on. Sorry.
no, please.
Well, I don't think we've talked about and let's talk. Did we? Tell me. Did we talk about 2015? Did we talk about the recording space and we haven't, right?
No, not yet.
Okay,
No.
thank you. I want to talk about, because the recording that I just finished listening to that came out on Divine Art in 2023 was actually fully and completely recorded in 2015 in London, St Paul's Girls' School, Hammersmith in London. Michael Ponder was a great sound engineer, and that Blötner, I can never pronounce the Ublatt properly, piano. I hear a magnificent instrument.
I'm
What
so pleased to
was
hear
it?
that.
Well, I mean, what was it?
Yeah, it was. Oh, yes. No, no, absolutely. I've always been a fan of Blüthner's, and uh, I maintained very good relations with the dealer in London when I was there, and before that, when I lived in Los Angeles, I maintained
Mm.
good relations with the Kasimov Blüthner people. And when it came time to record this album, I didn't want and I didn't need a sort of massive, max power Steinway
Yeah, especially the way you play.
yeah, it wasn't necessary and wasn't
Uh-huh.
really
Yeah,
appropriate for
yeah,
this
yeah.
program. And I wanted something, a bit sort of dark chocolate or a very thick kind of brandy.
Very Munich or something. I mean, I don't know what I'm talking about, but it is so German. Somehow
Yeah,
that
yeah.
sound is just so
And
warm and
there's a richness,
yeah.
something about the way the overtones interact with each other.
Mm.
And so, yeah, I wanted to use one of their pianos, and they were must express my gratitude to them publicly here. They were very, very accommodating in making an instrument available.
That's big. Yep.
Sorry.
That's big. That's
Yeah,
big.
that's a big help. Absolutely.
They're big instruments. It's no, it's not a
Oh
passing
yeah.
thought to work with a piano, get it somewhere, and take it back home. All that. Anyway.
No, absolutely. So I was very pleased to be able to record the album on this particular instrument.
And how did you find? Did you find this St. Paul's Girl School, or was it a well-known recording venue? I know St. Jude and others are
Well, St. Paul's
using it.
Boys' School just across the river is a very popular recording venue, but I happened to teach at St. Paul's Girls' School in Hammersmith,
Perfect.
and they have the music wing of, I think the building goes back to the late 19th century, and uh, keen-eyed or eared British listeners will be aware that Gustav Holst was the head of music. The
Oh, thank you for reminding me. Now, the St. Paul's Suite.
Yeah, exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. Written while he was there.
Never
Uh,
occurred to me until this moment. So sorry. Go ahead. Thank you for pointing that out.
but they have a lovely hall, which obviously has been redone over the decades,
Sure.
but a lovely hall there, acoustically set up absolutely right. And I got Blutner to bring a piano over there and recorded in there for 3 days during, I think it was a midterm break, a mid-autumn break in October of 2015.
Yeah, let's see, October. That means lots and lots of rain, as I recall. I'm
Yes.
just kidding, kind of. But yeah, so that's no easy delivery. Nothing's easy in London in winter, anyway. I want to read this your introduction because it's so eloquently written, and I think I mentioned to you I have always, not always, but I have fantasized as maybe those of us who are involved in 19th century literature or music or anything, we daydream maybe about what must life have been like at that much slower pace in the 19th century, let's say, in a big city. There's still no electricity. There are gas lamps and so on, but we're talking dim lighting and more dim lighting and less dim lighting and so on. So the idea of going out into the evening is a big deal, let alone, getting the horses behind the carriage and all the rest of it. It the idea of the necessity of staff at that time is quite understandable. Just to maintain the household, let alone the carriage room and the horses and all the rest of it. But here's what you say. You say for more than a century now, quite correctly, artificial light has been no further away than the flip of a switch. To us, night is nothing more than that period of the day when the sun is not shining. A few hours darkness overcome with the aid of technology. So you set the scene for this, and then you ask us to step back and imagine a time when the night was altogether more unknown. That really got my attention about how composers in that period, how differently they would anticipate and deal with the night, the darkness. Um, Help. So you ask us to step back. And it's the antithesis. This darkness, especially in the 19th century, was the antithesis of the clarity of illuminated day, and that spoke to me about Debussy and all the others, if you'll allow me. This amorphous kind of sounds that might maybe have something to do with this the subtlety of darkness, whereas daytime is so clear and clean, and you understand that darkness is much more subtle and much
Yeah.
more interpret in need of interpretation. Do you have something to say?
Well, no, I think no, I think you're spot on. I guess the only thing I would add to that, and perhaps I now that it's coming out of my mouth in this particular way, I think, gee, I wish I'd written that for the liner notes. But, I think if someone from the 18th or 19th century sees or hears that someone is going to play a piece called Nocturne, well, that word's going to have a lot of baggage with it that it won't have for us. It just means something different for them because of the fact that it was a completely different thing from the daytime. For us, it's just, oh yeah, well, I'll go flip a switch, put the light on, open up my laptop, and have an interview with someone who's two time zones behind me. And what is it now?
Just as we also consider nocturne, a piece. I mean, you see what I mean? The meaning
Yeah.
nocturne has kind of vanished in a way
Yes.
because we're in this this age of light 24/7 kind of
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah. It,
If
it
that makes
just
any
it
sense.
doesn't have the magic. It doesn't have the mystery. It doesn't have the baggage, for lack of a better term, that it would have had for the composers and their contemporary listeners. And I guess the program on the album is an attempt to just enter into that whole hog.
And it's a
And
travelogue. You
yeah,
mentioned in a way. You mentioned and now we'll journey.
yes,
So
yeah,
on and so forth. So the as we have determined, you open with the second sonata, Beethoven's second sonata, the Quasi una Fantasia, Moonlight. Uh, and you mentioned ornate title translates as sonata in the manner of a fantasy, but the nickname Moonlight originates as we know from a German poet who's also, I mean, music is all about imagination, allowing our brains to slip into all kinds of imaginative ideas, and as we mostly know, a German poet was reminded of the light reflecting off the surface of a lake. Now that's a wonderful piece of imagination, but it's not as though everybody in that time and in that moment hearing that movement had a similar experience, but it has stuck and allowed us all to have that imaginative experience, if you
yeah.
will. In other words, a little guidance doesn't hurt,
No,
Um, here's what you also write. It's a take on the critic's minds. Must have been an ominous one. You suggest, and again because of these softly undulating waters, perpetually threaten to send some horror to the surface. You say, end quote. And I read that and I thought, horror to the surface. Yeah, but I had never thought of that with Moonlight Sonata. In other words, what got into what? Tell me what, because I want to know about the horror coming threatening to come to the surface from the moonlit lake to grab that poet.
yeah,
See what I mean? I mean, but
yeah.
but I love that part of the darkness. So I was with you on the opening piece. I thought, yeah, yes, there is something down. The subtext, musical subtext of everything. You want to speak to that at all?
No, I think it's always been a dark movement to me, and
Yeah.
I get that it's popular. Of course, I understand that. But I think even as a teenager, I used to think it was a rather morbid movement, and particularly if you follow through to the rest of the sonata and you hear
Mm.
this third movement, it's not a pretty piece in
Mhm, mhm.
traditional, oh, I'll go home. I've had a rough day. I'll go home and put on Moonlight. Maybe some people do that. I wouldn't. I find it a very dark and
Mhm.
Beethoven has a few movements like that. The last movement of Tempest Sonata comes to mind.
Yeah,
There's
I mean,
some
oh, yeah,
lurk.
we could go on for hours
Oh,
because I am very worried about art music being reduced to entertainment in
yeah,
the minds of a public.
yes.
And I've had my own recent experiences as a writer of program notes to realize that people don't want to hear about how unhappy Beethoven was. He hid his deafness for like 8 to 10 years with happy jolly music. The Fourth Symphony and others, you'd never guess in a minute except you hear it subtly. But that's what I mean. You heard it.
Yeah,
We who know this repertoire
yeah.
hear it. But I'm worried that the public is being dumbed down so that it's they want pretty tunes or they don't want to hear about bad stuff, which is the whole substance of the human condition. That's
Yeah,
what worries me. So I'm glad that you. That's why I wanted to read that moment, kind of in fun, but undulating waters perpetually threaten to send some horror to the surface. Ooh, yes. But we're being a little silly about it. But this is serious stuff. This is not entertainment. It's all of
I
it.
couldn't agree more. Yeah, absolutely.
And in playing this Adagio sostenuto as the opening track, I immediately, I think, because it seemed consistent, what I put in my notes is I love the total lack of over-the-top drama. You know how sometimes these very popular sonatas can be played by, could they be Russians? Can be played in the most over-the-top, highly dramatic stuff, and they miss the point altogether. In my
Mm,
view, you play this like still waters. If you get my drift,
I think so,
you
yes.
imagine you play as even this poet imagined. The quiet lake in the dark and the moonlight on the still waters of a dark uh, lake. So, congrats on that one. I'm not quite sure where my compliments run out of steam, but I love that total lack of over the top drama in your playing of that movement. Does that make sense to you?
It does, and I'm pleased to hear
In
that.
other words, it's contemplative.
Yes, yeah, it's not hard on sleeve at all.
Thank you very much. Yeah, which is exactly right as far as I'm concerned. The dark is there. My stream of consciousness notes the dark is there, but without fuss.
Hmm,
It's exactly right because it does not pontificate and pose. Okay, you're
thank you.
okay with that? Okay.
I, yeah.
Okay, and then you follow that movement with the Nocturne in D flat, Opus 27, number 2, of Chopin, played with this steady manner. It's also why I love that instrument.
Mm.
Does it fall? Did that instrument feel good? Do you remember? It's been a while.
I remember it sounded good. I'm sure it felt good as well, but the lasting impression was one of the sound.
Yeah,
And just going back to the things we were saying about
sure.
water earlier, that nocturne reminds me very much of a barcarolle, just the time signature, the relative tempo.
Yeah.
And there was something about the treble of that piano that, it speaks, but it's not so thick that
Mm, mm.
there's I'm not quite sure how to describe it verbally, but it's a kind of sound where there's a bell-like quality to it, but it's not that it has a huge swell after every note. There's a clarity. Uh,
Any idea how old where the instrument dates from? Where that instrument dates from? I mean, 1915, or I mean, any idea at all?
it's not that old. Oh my gosh, I really
It
don't
doesn't
know.
matter. It doesn't matter, but I'm curious because I was going to get myself in trouble by suggesting that it was an old instrument, which would
It's
have a completely different temperament, if you will,
Yeah, it's
without
not.
stretching the meaning of the word too far.
Yeah.
Go.
No. It's not that old, but
Hmm.
if I worked for Blutner, I would take that observation as a compliment because I think it would mean that they've preserved a sort of
Thank you.
sound
You got it.
conception,
Yeah, exactly right. It's just an extraordinary sound and exactly perfect for this repertoire, including the 20th century
Yeah,
repertoire.
yeah, yeah.
So the Chopin Nocturne, we've night. Do you want to? Let's talk about him. I've got a couple that are triply. Well, actually, the Hindemith. I have several. I do this to bring them to my attention to talk about. But so after these, let's just say two familiar pieces. The third track is this Hindemith Nachstück from the Suite 1922, and as I told you, it's Opus 26. I'm trying to figure out where that is in his output, but this was new stuff to me. This one, and I'm really curious about that 1922 suite and what does that mean? It's after the war, the First World War, and so I mean I love history. So I mean and history and art are
Mhm.
combined. Um, why Hindemith? Yeah, is that too long a story? I mean, again, you don't do anything by happenstance. I think I'll throw some Hindemith in here and see how it flies. But go.
I really love that movement.
Thank
I know
you.
Hitler is not as popular as he once was. If
We
which
all go
is
through a Hindemith stage. I do remember going through a Hindemith stage, and
yeah,
then then he comes and goes. You know what I mean?
yeah.
In my consciousness, he comes and goes. Yeah.
I think he was just a little bit more present in the consciousness of the classical music world, say 30 or 40 years ago than
Yes,
he.
exactly
uh,
right. Yeah.
Um, but it's an early work in 1922. I think it's just the year of composition. I don't think it has any more significance than
Okay.
that.
Okay.
But the Nachtstück is the third of five movements, and most of the other movements are uh, dance movements, but they are jazz dances. There's a shimmy. The last movement is a ragtime. And
I
the
mean,
whole thing.
wonderful.
Yeah, I think the whole thing is meant to just smell very strongly of uh, Berlin during the Weimar
There you
Republic.
go.
Uh, that
There
kind.
you go. There you go. Now, thank you. That helped a lot.
Yeah,
The war is over, and it's cabaret time,
yeah, yeah,
if you will.
very
Yeah.
much.
Uh, and I say to myself, it's somehow dark, which of course is part of the point of the whole CD. Not only in tonality but in progressions downward. You know how it's
Yeah,
always moving downward. Is it the magic of creating a sense of night? These minor tonalities, of course, but it's also a sensibility that Hindemith has captured, the descent, kind
yeah,
of lower and lower, more and more spare and lonely. Remember, I'm only hearing this for the first time today, so am I okay with that? What it did this one in particular, the sentiment, because of these descending passages? And does that make any sense to you, or am I just
No,
daydreaming?
I
Yeah.
think it does. I'm not sure it was first and foremost or is first and foremost in my mind when I play it and hear it,
Uh-huh.
but no, why not? Yeah,
Well, there you go. Well, see, we're all off the hook. That's the beauty of music. Anybody can decide what they've heard, and it's perfectly okay. But that I'm descending, as we know from the Baroque period and everything else.
yeah,
There's meaning to Mannheim rockets go exploding upward, and descending passages down to Hades, if you will.
yeah,
So I found that interesting, and then to find this particular movement surrounded by dance tunes from the 20s
yeah.
means that this one is the serious one. This is where he's
Oh,
trying to say something about what I think maybe what just happened, because that war destroyed
yeah,
everything. You
yeah.
know.
No, there's something very expressionist, Edvard.
Yes, and from Hindemith, that's very interesting.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, do we have anything else here? What did so I wanted to ask you, how about because I remember this is, how about the preparation of this Hindemith piece? Is there, aside from intellectual preparation, is there anything in the actual writing at all? I'm just asking, that you recall? In
Of
terms of, because I've got a reason why later for other pieces where the playing is just superb and the writing is incredibly difficult. But this is not that kind of a case. But I was just wondering maybe about the settings. He moves around strangely, doesn't he? Am I thinking right? Mystery, secrets, an ecstatic dream state even is
yeah,
reached
very much so.
at one point, and then these mysteries and secrets and reflections, all very personal somehow. Which, of course, that's why I keep wanting to think that the war, the war. I'm fascinated by the idea of what world events do to us.
Sure,
The
sure.
40 years leading up to them, and then the 40 years afterward. I'm thinking of the Napoleonic Wars. Now I understand Schubert.
Yeah,
The song cycles. They're the trauma of that Napoleonic experience of those wars. It picks up. It's edgy, which is very Hindemitian, if you will, and then back to the beginning figure and so on. But that was really nice. What did you have to say about it? Let's see. 1920. Well, here you go again. Uh, I'm happy to report that you declare it a nightmarishly beautiful movement. I love that, and it is. There is there's something disturbing there. The middle section is hypnotic, twinkling deliriously, you say. We need to trade places. You kind of write like I do. In the heights of the keyboard, while the return of the opening material builds, this is you, where I'm quoting, builds to a dissonant, passionate climax in which motives from the middle section and so on unexpectedly return and so on. And you say these motives return to haunt the listener.
Yeah.
So you got deep into this one, into this piece clearly, and that's the beauty of art. Oh, it's the beauty to find the sub-basement, to find the subtext.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, what else? Well, we're looking at Debussy. Here I go. Oh, I can't. I'll butcher it. Les sons et les parfums tonnant dans l'air du soir. In other words, nighttime, the perfume of the night or something. What sounds and perfumes swirl in the evening air. I really butchered that one.
Yeah.
But so the imagery, Debussy has already set the imagery.
Yeah.
In words for you. German expressionism in the 1920s again, and as you mentioned, Hindemith even maybe dipped in there for a bit, if you will, this kind of German impressionism of the 1920s. Expressionism in the 1920s. And you say wonderfully, I love your program notes. Now we travel west to what may be a Parisian cafe. And the reason I wanted to keep this is I wasn't thinking Parisian cafe. You know what I mean? My head had something else going on in it. So that's why I wanted about this, the beauty of this experience, this classical music experience, if you will, that 97% of the living humans on the earth are not aware of. Okay?
Yes.
I mean,
sadly. Yeah.
Sadly, the idea that your imagination, even like reading a good novel, doesn't happen. It doesn't happen in pulp fiction, but transports your imagination. So as I said, sounds and perfumes swirl in the evening air. The music suggests languid. You say this nighttime scene, and I love the word languid. But then you add that little bit of intrigue. And I think that is a reference you mentioned with intrigue. You bring up these interesting words throughout the program, and remember that that's because you have chosen to dip into this territory, this night music. You explain what it must have been at one time in the history of these composers in society, but it's there. Do you want to give me anything about this prelude that you recalled? Anything about preparing
I
it?
think you've pretty much covered it. It's yeah, they're just some interesting and slightly crunchy chords at the end, which I don't know, sound to me like, maybe someone is sipping a glass of wine that may have some poison in it and he doesn't know about. I don't know. It just
Don't show this to your supervisor, okay?
right.
I'm kidding.
There are plenty of movements by Debussy which are completely full of light without that hint of something else. This is not one of them. I think there's a little something going on.
Yeah, and it's again. I'm sorry, but I've been looking at this whole thing about World War I.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
how many artists were, well, you couldn't help but be involved,
Yeah.
and some were, as we know from Ravel, injured even. So the psychological injury, let alone physical injury, and so on. So darkness is perfectly okay if you survived a world war that tore the whole organized system to pieces, to shreds. I say something about a nice interpretation. Of course, I've told you already. I'm going to have trouble writing the review because this is really, honestly.
Thank you
I
very
think perfection is the word for the playing for the reasons we've talked about. There's nothing over the top. It's just clean and clear. The instrument, by the way, you mentioned earlier, the clarity. And later in some of the more complex contrapuntal pieces, I hear everything. It's just a one, and that's your doing as well as the instrument responding well to you, the way you have organized the pressures. And it's a fascinating, complicated thing working with two hands and making color and dynamic and all the rest of it. Let's see. Now it's time to discuss Le Résignon en Amor. The two. Let's you talk about it about how you put these together. We spoke a little bit earlier, but oh, and by the way, you play Baroque repertoire on the piano. It's just superb. The music is perfect for the piano in the way and stylistic manner in which you play, which is also clean, quiet, no undue fuss. Beautiful ornamentations. I'm not sure how many. Didn't have the score, but how many were written, and how many you might have improvised, and so on. But a beautiful performance of the Couperin pieces. And tell me a little bit about this. Pièce de clavecin, Le Résignon en Amor.
Well, I mean, I really do love the Baroque period. And we all, pianists all play Bach and sometimes a bit of Scarlatti on the modern piano. And as is the case with any style or composer, I'm always interested what else was being written at the time. And I think around the time I finished my undergraduate work, I started to really branch out and ask myself, well, what did Handel write for the harpsichord? Why aren't we playing that on the piano? And then I stumbled into the wonderful world of the French Baroque. Well, my goodness. And I'm a great lover of Rameau. He might be among my favorite composers.
Les Andes Galants. I have it practically memorized, that whole opera. It's a
Okay.
long story, but for
Okay.
example, Les Andes Galants.
Yeah.
Amazing.
And he wrote a small collection of keyboard music, well, small by contrast with Bach, perhaps, which is a difficult comparison for any.
Yes.
But, it's tremendously imaginative stuff, and it works fantastically well on the modern piano.
Yes.
He uses the keyboard in a
Yes.
very forward-looking way. That's not necessarily the case with Couperin, who I think is a little bit more invested in the tradition and the sound world of the harpsichord. And my feeling is, if you're going to play Couperin on the piano, you have to be a little bit selective or think really carefully how you're going to deal with certain things. I think The Nightingale in Love is not one of those tricky movements, fortunately. It is, however, chock full of ornamentation. And so to address your point, he was, he was very, very specific about what he wanted. And
I was wondering, yeah.
had him on record saying, play every ornament I put in there and don't add anything.
Oh, really? The second part of the instruction.
Yeah.
And don't touch a thing. Play what I wrote and don't do anything else.
Yeah, oddly prescriptive. But I got put on to that particular piece actually while attending a Brahms concert in London, where Christophe Rousset was there with a few friends of his. I forget the rest of the program. Isn't that how it always is? There's just one or two things that you take away years later. And he played this piece with the variation as a solo in the middle of this concert, and it was so utterly captivating. It was just, the universe just stopped for about 8 or 9 minutes or however long it takes to get through it. And it was so, and of course, a huge part of that is his own playing. He's, such a seductive player. But I just remember leaving that concert kind of with my head in the clouds, and I thought, I've got to find a score for this. And so when the idea came to play this album a few years later, I thought, this has got to be on it. This has to be on it. It's such a beautiful piece.
And it is, indeed. And your performance, by the way, I loved it immediately. Remember, I wasn't ready for Couperin. on the CD, I wasn't ready to go there, let alone on piano. It's a stylistic thing, and also how one approaches a modern keyboard to interpret this period repertoire. And the embellishments, I say, are charmingly performed. The piece is performed in a wonderfully relaxed manner, and that hypnotizing all by itself. There's something just so, I don't maybe languid is the word here. It works
I think no, I
beautifully on the
yes, yes.
piano.
Yeah.
And it's and also I say here wonderfully thoughtful, careful in the best sense of the word performance. And you've just told me why. You fell in love with it ages ago, and it's been in your head ever since. I'm sure, really. You may not have known it, but it's been there. You've worked it out somewhere in your eighth consciousness, somewhere in the back of that brain. But then then what on earth, where, how is it that you found Lowell Lieberman's Nocturne, number 5, in D major, and thought, I'll just slam that D. And you mentioned already, we have to have a little bit of Brea. We don't want too much, too Cooper, and it'll be too dull or something, because there's the other, the double, double de Rossignol. But tell me that what? There could have been 1,000 choices.
Well, I, it isn't anything more than what we were talking about earlier. It was just a very, very good match. It matches the key.
Okay.
It provides a hint of darkness in between these two Couperin movements that I feel are very, very light. Not in the sense of léger, to use the French word, but they're full of this kind of light. It's beautiful, it's warm, there isn't a darkness about it. And I thought, well, this makes a very good bedfellow to these pieces. And as I mentioned earlier, this filigree work at the top of the keyboard that kind of ties its sound world in with the Couperin. There's something a little bit bird-songy about it, at least to my ear. And it to me, it seems like a very natural match to make a Lieberman sandwich out of.
And I say to myself here, wow, the balances, the inner voicings, they're quite clear and understandable. That's a tough trick here, but it's also an instrument that just helps you achieve that kind of clarity. This piece is a gem, I say. Now, and then stream of now a return to the material in the beginning and so on. The piece was very, very nice. And then the next Cooper, and it just the matchup is amazing. I have no idea Lowell Lieberman when he composed this piece, 40s or something. I don't know, 50s maybe.
Actually.
Pardon?
90s, 1996, I think.
I'll be damned. That's amazing, wonderful. Anyway, for you to have made that decision, and I know we've mentioned this, I guess when I write the review, I'll go back and have a look at tracing the key areas, this progression of key
Oh,
areas.
yes, yeah.
But anyway, it works beautifully. Congratulations, that one was nice. And then of all people, Bartok.
Yeah.
The night, and I'm thinking, now, what do you, okay, I'm doing a night album. Give me a title with night in it. The superficiality of the possibilities that others, okay, it's going to be a night album. Give me something, But this Bartok, out of doors, I also had never heard. And this is what you say, it's an evocative movement that manages to hold together some fairly disparate musical ideas, I'll say, typically Bartokian. It depicts the outset might. I love the way you qualify your own imagination. The outset might depict a swamp or riverbank, you say, whose stillness is intruded upon by a growing chorus of chirping crickets. And I listened to it and I thought, what? Belching frogs and other noisy fauna. Now that all by itself should be in the New Yorker. Eventually a somber melody comes in and so on. So your explanations of these, of everything, that's why I pulled them down, because they're so precious in the best possible way. And then how it works into a very, very Bartokian kind of thing, these lively dances, these folk dances, and so on. Very Eastern European, if you will, kind of temperament.
There's something,
Yeah.
Maybe it's the material that surrounds it. You're absolutely right. There is that Eastern European element, but there's also something kind of primitivist about it, or at least the way the material.
Yes. Those folk tunes, where he derived those folk tunes from, for example. Yeah, something like that. Gypsy, even? I don't know.
Yeah.
Is that what you were saying? I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, well, I think those are certainly the origin of it, but I don't know if we will excuse my imagination once more. There just feels it almost feels like something some arcane.
That's why I'm not. That's because you just described what I was experiencing. I
Okay,
tried to find a way to describe it in and was using your program notes. It's so incredibly evocative of mystery. I say to myself, which to me it is like in my own mind, I was, if I'm in any agreement with you, in a sense, I was seeing misty woods in Bartok land and ancient farmers, coming out and slaughtering the boar and whatever. I don't know, but that kind of atavism, if that makes any sense.
there's a good word. Yes.
Let's see. It's wonderful. It's wonderful. I was so glad to hear that piece. And little ideas, these little fragments of ideas, flit all over the place. They're in and out, folk tune
Yeah.
fragments and so on, which is so satisfyingly Bartokian, if you will. Now we're back. Now you kind of take us out in a way with the Chopin, the C minor Nocturne, Opus 48, number one. Again, nice, and I do this. I say nice performance, comma, period. Stylish period performance. Now the deeply moving material after the intro gets very powerful. This is, I think you even mentioned in the program notes, this ninth piece on the track, the Chopin Nocturne, is one of the more emotional and bigger kind of
Yeah.
nocturnes on the CD. Yeah. And I say the voicing again is perfect. This wonderful playing, this fabulous temperament in the playing, and I don't know quite what that means, but you know what I mean, where you understand that the Chopin-esque temperament, I guess is what I'm trying to say, that how to play this music without all the bravura that has glommed on, all the fatty bits that have been glommed onto so much of this repertoire over the past 200 years.
Sure.
How's that?
Well, thank you. Yeah.
Okay. Well, let's move on to Robert Schumann.
Okay.
Next up, Robert Schumann, Fantasy-Stück. I never can figure out whether I'm supposed to pronounce the E at the end. Never mind. Opus 12, In der Nacht. Beautiful, and this is real, romanticism. And you and I have discussed this. Here it is. Let me just finish this though. I've just noticed it's so difficult to get every note to speak in such a complex piece. Uh,
Yeah.
and it's wonderfully put together. And so I double, triple X'd it to wonder how difficult is this Robert Schumann piece to put together, just technically, because there is so much stuff going on all the time. And then this, as we've agreed, this is nighttime, all right. This is the nighttime of his psychosis, if you will. I mean, it's present in virtually everything. Somewhere, anywhere. There's just as with Beethoven, there's always a hint of the unhappiness of the man's life and so on. Speak to me a little bit about this Robert Schumann piece.
Well, I hadn't played it before. It's a very standard work,
Mm-hmm.
and quite often is assigned to younger pianists who are getting to know the works of Schumann. Um, so I don't think I was quite prepared for how difficult it was. And once I was working on it and kind of trying to overcome the technical obstacles that it poses, I realized why I never really liked it, and I don't think I'd ever heard it played the way I thought it ought to sound. Certainly not by, the various young people who often play it. And it's not one of these. When I say it poses these technical difficulties, it's not the sort of thing where you see someone play it and it's visually riveting because they're throwing their arms all over the keyboard, flailing all over the place. It is the difficulty in maintaining three levels of sound because you've got all those running, melody floating on top of that. You have a bass which sometimes needs to come up and come back down, and then on top of that, all three of them are dynamically doing this, and you have to pace the sequences, you have to pace the crescendi and the decrescendi. It kicked my butt, honestly.
Did he write this for Clara? Because that would explain kicking your butt. I can't
No,
remember if he
not
wrote this
explicit.
piece for her.
I don't think so. He certainly did write to her about it, and as he did with so many of his early works,
Yeah,
and said,
yeah.
"Oh, now that I've written it, it makes me think of you." But I don't know that it was written
Okay.
specifically for her in mind as its
Yeah, that's what I was. That
recipient.
was the gist of my question. I was just curious because it's clearly very difficult to put
Yeah,
together,
yeah.
and that is well, I say it. It's so difficult to get every note to speak in such a complex piece.
I think
You
it's often played too fast.
Hmm,
That's what I
not
that's
surprising. Not surprising. Which speaking of the night, speaking of taking 3 hours to get dressed, let alone the carriage ride to the opera house, playing music, this romantic repertoire too fast is an oxymoron. How's that? It's an oxymoron. What I mean by that is that these people were from a slower time. Uh,
yeah.
Now I'm stretching that a tiny bit, but in Robert Schumann's case, I think it's you have described. Technically, it's you hear much more when the tempo's brought down a little bit in terms of the sort of frenetic
Oh,
performances
okay.
we've heard in the past. And the reason I feel a little bit hypocritical about it is because Beethoven and Schubert begged for faster tempos.
That's true.
So maybe I don't know by the 1830s or something. I have no idea. I didn't have the opportunity to look up composition dates. Uh, that's all I'm saying is that's so ironic sometimes how to interpret that period. We're kind of crossing over periods, but go ahead. Do I have make any sense, and do you have anything to say about my
No, you
idiocy?
do make sense, but you're opening up a Pandora's box of historical performance practice
Yeah.
issues.
You mean the Schubert Beethoven thing,
Well,
or do
but
you mean here in the Schumann?
also just what tempi
Well,
is,
yeah, yes, yeah, yeah.
you know. Um,
But the metronome had, well, we don't need to go there because you're right. It's a whole other conversation. But I am of the but there are quotes, and both of them said everything is too slow. Play it faster.
yeah,
And now we play Schubert symphonies in cut time, and they are fabulous. I'm using the term, kind of deliberately cut time. But anyway, so then there's Schumann. There's Robert Schumann. This luxuriant romantic,
yeah,
this hyper romantic, to even talk himself into this status of unhappiness that he did. And there's everything else about his psychological problems, but that didn't sound right either. Get me out of this. I'm in trouble. Sorry,
no,
Robert.
I know, I know what you meant.
Okay, thank you. But anyway, very, very difficult piece, and you approached it very sensibly and very intelligently so that we could hear everything. It's wonderful. Then, you have the nerve to put a Barber Nocturne in. I guess it's because of the tonal schematic you're creating. I'll check on that before I write the written review. You'd better be right.
No, no, it's F minor, A flat major, absolutely.
Okay, okay.
Yeah,
Uh, uh, and again, it's nominally an homage to the Irish composer John Field, a wonderful Irish composer John Field, uh, who essentially, I guess you're right, invented the piano nocturne. Now that I think about it, all those Field nocturnes that are out there, but it seems more akin to the spirit of Chopin, which of course is why you kind of programmed this uh, connection. Anything there? It's very, very. I don't have a whole lot to say about it. It's serious. It's moody, um, and the performance makes jewels of every bit of it.
well, thank you, thank you.
Okay.
All I would say is I think I'm all of the 20th century works that appear on the album, um, I think are pieces that are fairly clear in their emotional communication. I'm not especially interested in 20th century and contemporary music that is so deliberately stark that there isn't an emotional
Yeah.
connection, and so I think I hope I've chosen pieces that suit my personality and my the affinity is not quite the right word, but the connection that I do feel with certain 20th century and contemporary composers.
Yeah, no, it makes perfect sense. And again, you had to have spent hours and hours putting this program together. Yeah, I just had the word, but the intention is very, very clear. The connected tissues are very clear. And again, you choose just, we're talking about the third piano sonata of Brahms, you just play the slow movement, and the purists are screaming and yelling and running for to throw themselves into the sea over that. How dare you? How dare you? All that. Probably not anymore. I think we've gotten a little bit past that kind of purism, but that's the point. Is that this movement? You quote the German writer Sternau. I hope I'm pronouncing it properly. The evening falls, the moonlight shines. There, two hearts are united in love and hold each other in blessed embrace. Wow.
Yeah, it's hot.
Gorgeous. It's just, and it is an absolutely heartbreakingly gorgeous movement, and we know all about that, about subtext and emotional subtext with these composers. Brahms never got over Clara, as far as I'm concerned. Never got over her. And it's everywhere. Those moments, bittersweet moments of regret and so on. So beautiful choice. And then you have the nerve to end this. I'm giving you a rough time, but Debussy's Cloud of Noon, and it's one of those, when you stick your neck out, all of us, conductors, instrumentalists, on the memorized and known by even the pook, even the common folks recognize these things. That was horrible, forgive me, but you end with Cloud of Noon, and based on that wonderful poem of Paul Verlaine. What do I have to say about it? It's just you say everything here. The journey ends where it began, and then and that's really the point. The CD is completely. We're way over, but the CD is really just beautifully thought out, beautifully put together. Congratulations on that. I'm so glad you were able to get this produced. To have a project like this, and as I mentioned to you off camera, to have finished it in 2015, to have gotten to that point, and then it doesn't exist for the rest of the planet until you are able to put together the funding and or find, as with Divine Art, a really amenable company to help you produce the CD. It's perseverance personified, if you forgive the alliteration. Have I forgotten anything in all this mess? This hour and 20 minutes.
In some detail or other, yeah.
Well, as I've mentioned, and now I give you the speech, you and I have had a great chat. That's all that matters. And some people will listen to the whole thing. Some people will listen to 3 minutes, some will 7, and so on. I've mentioned this ad nauseum. Some won't listen to it at all. I don't care. I really don't care. We have had the chat. We've done the cycle, and that's all there is to it. Okay, are we ready for grand finales and goodbyes? Anything that I've forgotten or that you want to say?
No. I thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure to be able to talk about it, and I'm so glad to hear what your response has been to the tracks. It's very gratifying because it sounds like a lot of what I was hoping would be heard and conveyed was.
Good.
And there are few things that please an artist more than that.
Good. Okay, so I'm happy to have had the experience. Again, we've been chatting with pianist Andrew Brownell. We're talking about your Divine Art album from 2023, released in 2023, in the can, sitting there waiting to be discovered since 2015, Shades of Night. Thanks very much. It's been a great pleasure chatting with you.
Thank you.
See you.